Hello, fellow anti-novelists, anti-netters, friends, and soon-to-be Lilligans. This officially launches our sessions on research-driven writing. So we're going to tackle two pieces today. The first is origin stories, and the second is how to implement and perpetuate research throughout your writing process. So let's jump right in. First, setting up for research. I will link below my series on how to actually set up your Zettelkasten. I'm going to assume for our purposes that you already know how to do that. But essentially, you're going to have three places where things go. You're going to have your bibliography card, which is alphabetized A to Z. That's like your library card catalog that records all the books and resources that you're using. You're going to have your index that's full of keywords that help you get back to and find all of your research and your ideas. And you're going to have main cards. That's where your ideas actually live. So, with that said, why do I believe the Zettelkasten method is key? I'm just going to say a quick word about this because I want to make something clear. In the tradition of Nicholas Luhmann, who originally implemented the Zettelkasten for creative work, and Scott Schepper, my mentor, who has helped me understand how best to use it, it's important to know that they always advocated that a true Zettelkasten is used for creating content, okay? It's not just taking a million notes. It's not just copying down what you've read, or God forbid, just copying quotes. It's all about creating your best work. So with that as our first principle, the Zettelkasten exists to help you get your writing done. So let me just issue a couple of warnings. First, resist the urge to stay buried in research mode. Research mode is a writer's worst enemy if you allow yourself to get sucked in and stay there. So don't keep putting your writing off to do extra reading or extra research. Do the writing even before you think you're ready. Just get your words on the page and then use your research to help further that. Second, resist rabbit holing. You could follow trails of a topic forever. Don't let yourself do that. Put a limit on your time. Maybe you're only going to research something for 30 minutes and then you're going to commit to 30 minutes of writing. Use one to inform the other, but don't allow yourself to get stuck in research because you really can stay there forever. Maybe transfer items immediately into your writing space. So as soon as you research an idea or you have some cards written out or you've captured a thought or an idea, get it into your writing space. Whether you work in Word, Google Docs, Scrivener, whatever you do, even if you handwrite it out, get your ideas into your writing space so that you can see them as part of your story and you can start to develop them in the context of your story right away, rather than getting stuck in research. Share feedback or have groups so that you can get deadlines met. You can be held accountable. Rely on your peers, even me. I have a writing group that is indispensable to my writing process because I always have to be getting those words on the page and sharing them in group so that we can workshop them. Where to use research-driven writing? Let's get into the thick of it. First, I would suggest starting big. Start with the main theme of your novel, okay? What are the main concepts? And I've made some notes. Are there philosophical or moral questions to answer? Well, perhaps you're going to read the classics on philosophy and moral critique, okay? So those classics can help inform the bigger themes in your book. Do you have cultural or societal questions? Go to your social scientists. Look to your experts on those big questions so that you can start to grapple with those and how you're going to use them to inform the work that you're writing. What about issues of genre? Are you writing something historical, something fantasy, something science fiction? Are you going to have to do a lot of world building? Each of those items are going to inform the things that you're having to research. So for example, my book is speculative fiction with historical elements. So I know there are specific things I'm going to have to look up and find in order that my story rings true. So as we progress, we're going to look at three foundations of story. We're going to look at character, which is the who of your story. We're going to look at setting, which is the where and the when. And we're going to look at plot, which is how your story moves along and what happens. Keep in mind, these foundations are not a straight line. We're always moving in between. They're interchangeable in terms of how we're looking things up to move the story along. So with that said, let's take a quick look. This is the book Darwin's Doubt. I highly recommend it by Stephen C. Meyer. He's the author of The Signature of the Cell. The reason this book is important to my story is because my main male character, Marshall Branch, is very well schooled in wildlife biology, botany, and those kinds of sciences. So I was reading this book so I would have a better idea, number one, of what his arguments and his points of view would be, and number two, how those might play out and be injected into my story. So let's take a quick look. On page 57, I have my bibliography card, which has Stephen Meyer, my author's name, title of the book, subtitle, and then I have a little line that says goal. Explore evolution theory as Branch would have. Okay, so here, and I'm swiping that with blue so that at a glance I know this card, this book, is relevant to my main male character. So now I have a main card that says Evolution, Darwin's Doubt, Burgess Bestiary. What Branch knows? Question, when did he read this? Question, how does it influence his work on the Voynich manuscript? And then I make a note to see Riverbank. Riverbank is a Chicago-based laboratory sprawling estate that was founded by George Fabian. You don't care about that, but what's important is I'm already making notes as I'm getting into this primary resource about how these things apply to my character. So I'm already having that conversation with myself and giving myself breadcrumbs to follow. Second, I've got another card, again, swiped with blue so I know it's Branch, in his teens and 20s, eugenics and Darwinism. So I know those were hot topics in the sciences during those years of his study. And I make a note, argument against evolution. So I'm already starting to form a sense of what is his worldview? What does he believe? How does he defend those beliefs? So that's how those items play out using this book. And then on the back of my bibliography card, I've got page number 26, Burgess Bestiary, and page 56, the artifact hypothesis. So again, I'm just using the reading of that primary source material in order to think through, what does this character know? How does he know it? Let's look at a second quick example, which is for my female main character, which is Dr. Tara Kaler. So I have a note under her cards, which says Nelson Atkins Museum. I've gone and looked up the hours that the museum is open for business. I note that on Tuesday and Wednesday it's closed. I note that there is something called the Roselle Court, which I personally know from having been there. That's a restaurant. And then I make a note, the history of the basin, horse fountains, memory, underlined in pink. So I'm telling myself that after having reviewed the history and the hours and the details about the Nelson Atkins Museum where Tara Kaler works, I know that I need a scene in the Roselle Court. It will somehow involve the history of the basin, and it will be relevant to the horse fountains, which is one of her critical memories. Okay, so do you see how I'm starting to use the details, my research about the museum to inform her story? I also make a note, the steps to P.F. Chang's, it's 13 minutes via Emmanuel Cleaver Boulevard, or you can take 46th Street. So what that's telling me is, from where she works to an area where this critical scene takes place, it's a 13-minute walk. Okay, so that's how I'm using research and observations about the real world, about the Nelson Atkins Museum, in order to build scenes and pieces of my story that are relevant to Tara. Let's look at a second example. This card is labeled Terra Feminarium and it says map. When I was originally doing reading about different historical mythologies, different origin stories, just things that interested me, I ran across something called the Terra Feminarium. The Terra Feminarium means women's land. Edmund, the king of the Swedes, expelled their king. The king's son, Anand, went to enlarge the kingdom and landed at the Terra Feminarium. That is an island, some suspect, could be the Amazons. But when he landed at this island, he and his army were killed because the women poisoned the spring water that they were drinking, thereby getting rid of those evil men. So very interesting historical element here. So I did a lot of reading about the women's land, how it was found, what we know about it. And I even, for my own purposes, because I need to see things in my own hand, I drew out a map of it. I don't know how well you can see this, but so you've got Tallinn, which looks over Tallinn Bay, which is on the north end of modern Estonia. And then you've got Neser. Neser is the women's island. It's about 8 miles off of Tallinn in Estonia, out in the Tallinn Bay. That Nesser Island sits between Glacier Bay and the remaining Gulf of Finland. So over here you've got the Baltic Sea. Down here you've got Latvia, just to give you kind of a sense of space. Over here you've got Russia, which is where William Voynich was born. Some of you know the Voynich manuscript figures prominently into my book. So do you see how I'm starting to plot points based on the history of my story? Because Dr. Tara Kaler's family, the women, were part of the Terra Feminarium. So they came from Nassar. So this is their history. Not coincidentally, it's also part of the history of William Voynich, who wrote the critical manuscript, which is the key to my book. So as you're thinking through, how are you going to collect the elements of your story? In the last video, I said, let your natural zone of fascination guide you. That's exactly what I did. And as that zone of fascination took me down various reading avenues, I was able to start to assemble those pieces into things that could then be a framework onto which I could hang my story. So this is just a tiny peek into where we're headed for using research and reading and how to start creating elements of your story around what you find. In the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about source material and delineate between different kinds of sources so that you have a really good handle on what you're looking at when you're reading and how you might use it. So I hope this was helpful. I appreciate your time. I know that's your most precious resource and I value it very much. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.